Well, thank you, Brian, for that kind introduction and very informative introduction. And it's good to see everyone again. I must say I'm feeling a little bit, it feels a little bit weird to be standing up here after 20 months of being in my apartment and at Queen's Park. But it's great to see people again. And the job's not completely done. We have to remain vigilant, but boy, it feels really good. So thank you again for inviting me, Bill, and thank you for that introduction, Brian. So I will speak for about, I think, 15 or 20 minutes. Bill, you asked me how long my presentation will be, and I said I really don't know, but you've got the paddle, and I'm used to those paddles. I've seen those paddles before, and he'll let me know when it's time to shut up and take some questions. You know, I also, you referenced, and I will reference the roundtable that I was fortunate enough to give a speech on here at the old facility in 2010. You mentioned it about who's going to bail out sovereigns, because I think debt and deficit still matter. Not in the short run, we're going to do everything it takes to support getting through COVID, but in the long run, we've got to keep our eye on these debts and deficits because they're not sustainable or desirable in the long run. Now, I'm going to put up some slides. Now, for anyone who's been in government, and I see some of my friends in the room who've been in government before, they know that as a minister, the remarks are prepared for you and you read from them and you cannot deviate from the script. And I said, I'm at CD Howe. I want to give a presentation. No, mister, you have to read from a script. So it turns out I'm the Minister of Finance and we're going to do slide presentations today. So I'll kick things off and really three things that I really want to highlight. One is identifying what the problem is. Number two, what our vision is. And number three, so how are we going to actually achieve the plan to support that vision? So as was mentioned, a big part of our plan is to protect our progress, as Brian mentioned, our progress against COVID-19. We've made historic investments, some $19 billion last year to fight the pandemic, and I've put aside more money again this year to fight pandemic, and again, more COVID time-limited funds next year, because we have to, this pandemic, this COVID-19 and variants will be with us for some time. It won't be eradicated anytime soon, and you don't know what's around the corner. So we're going to continue to make investments to protect our progress, and we're going to build on that progress by pivoting also to building Ontario, and that's a big part of our plan. So as we say here, we have a plan for jobs, we have a plan for the future, and we have a plan to build Ontario. So let me start with the problem statement, if you will. You know, first off, we see that the economic growth is exceeding our expectations. When we did the budget in 2021, which was March 24th, the economic growth forecasted at that point where the private sector was 4.4, and of course with inflation of 2.2, we had a nominal growth rate of 6.6%, which in a good, that would be a great year in normal years. Since the budget, we've taken the private sector forecasts, which have obviously upgraded the economic forecast. In fact, when I did the first quarter results in August, the economic forecasts were even greater, and they've been tempered somewhat since then, bringing them back down, but still an increase over what I presented in the budget. So you see in the dark blue, where private sector is forecasting 4.6% real GDP growth, and another 5.5% in inflation, so nominal growth of 10.1. So that's part of the environment that we're operating in. Secondly, unemployment. You know, the contraction that we had in economic activity was quite substantive. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen, and I've been in business for about 30 plus years, and I'm a history student, so seeing a contraction of 12% GDP was quite dramatic, and the job losses were quite dramatic. And as you can see, from the peak of 7.3 million jobs down to 7 million, we're recovering some of those jobs, and we're forecasting job growth. However, just getting back to where you were back in, I don't know, January, February of 2020 to today isn't exactly world beating. So we need to continue to have our focus on job growth. We are 45,600 jobs over what we had pre-pandemic, but clearly, as I just said, that's falling still far short of where we need to be. Now I'll go on to the deficit. The deficit has improved somewhat based on our forecasts. In March of 2021, when I tabled the budget, we had forecasted for that fiscal year the budget to be $33.1 billion. That's for this year coming up. Where we tabled in the fall economic statement about 10 days ago that we expect the budget this year to come in at deficit to come in at $21.5 billion. So you can see a significant improvement over what we even said in March. And I'll explain the reasons why in a second. As we look forward, we've got a path to reducing the deficits. A lot of it has to do with economic growth. And obviously we tax nominal GDP, so we get a boost there as well. Now, in March, when we did the budget, when you have a 12% contraction in the economy, typically your tax revenues go down. In every contraction, your tax revenues go down. But for the first time, probably in 100 years, our tax revenues went up, even though we had an economic contraction. So we've benefited both from having more tax receipts come in because of all the federal and provincial supports that we put in place, as well as the rebound, if you will, on economic growth. So let me get into some of the challenges that we've got. Here we go. Productivity. It's probably too small a print. Yeah, it's definitely too small. But what I can tell you on that slide, and it's too small on my slide here, so I'm going to have to look up. But the yellow is I believe the U.S. Growth rate in terms of productivity, and the line on the bottom, the dotted blue line, is Ontario. So even Canada has a higher productivity growth rate than Ontario. So if you're a classic economist who says, and I'm generalizing that economic GDP is labor times productivity, if your productivity isn't keeping pace, then you better have a good labor pool growing. Those two combinations are so important to our long-term prospects. And why is that so important? Well, that is so important because how we pay for all our healthcare services that Brian talked about, and we are investing significant amounts, and I will get into that. But to pay for that, you can go with tax increases, but that at some point becomes counterproductive, or you can cut spending, and that's not the path that this finance minister would prefer. So improving your economy and improving your productivity and having a skilled labor force is so critical for the future of this province. Going next to population, the population challenge. So Bill, you're right. This is one of the reasons I was so concerned in 2010. That we had, it was on the back end of the financial crisis, and government balance sheets exploded, taking on a number of financial sector debts and consumer debts and putting them on the taxpayer's balance sheet. And debt and deficits, I believe that they matter. And one of the things that we have to be very cognizant of, and Paul Martin said it famously, it's not ideology, it's math. We have an aging population, and the healthcare costs are back-end loaded in an aging population. So if you've got a population that is got back-end loaded in terms of age, and but will continue to grow and need services, we need to have a strategy and a plan for that. So that's why that is so critically important. And as you can see, you probably can't see in some of the smaller numbers, but the growth rates around the province are disparate. So our population growth in the north will be pretty flat-lined, the northeast as well. And obviously big growth in the GTA, and we'll get into that a little bit further. And finally, the skills challenge that we've got in this province is another big challenge for us. We have the lowest percentage of apprentices or trades at 4.5%, which is below the 10.5% Canadian average. And I don't think I have to point out Exhibit A, which is the 100+ cranes that we have just in the GTA. I mean, that's greater than the next 5 largest 5 cities combined. And the aging population within the trades, and by the way, it's very male dominated. So that's why we're so focused on providing skilled trade investments for women, for get the stigma out as well earlier in grade school and beyond, and really investing a significant amount in the skilled trades, as well as reskilling and retraining people in the workforce. So that's the problem. Let me get into our vision and how we're going to fix this. And that was very much in our fall economic statement. Protecting our progress. I'm not going to go through every one of these bullets that we put in. Brian mentioned, I believe, one, which was the backlog and the acute surgeries and the complex needs for more convalescents at home and the home and community care. I believe that's the number 2 one up on the bullet. Look, we have to invest in physical infrastructure in our health system. We have to invest in the human health resources in our healthcare system, and we have to invest in mental health and addiction for all our frontline workers. As we tend to an aging population, we would have had this challenge without COVID-19. Layer in COVID-19 with an aging population, with a growing population, the stresses on our healthcare system are acute. That's why in the budget this year, I put additional money into hospital builds, because we've underinvested over the last couple of decades in our physical capacity in our hospitals. We've also significantly underinvested in our long-term care facilities. And if you just think about the one stat where 2011 to 2018, 611 new beds were made in the province, net new beds for long-term care. Our waiting list today is 38,000. Think about the mismatch, aging population, many of whom have high-end complex needs, such as Alzheimer's and dementia. That's often the only place you can have the type of care you need is in a long-term care home. But you know, if you don't build anything, you clearly don't need nurses and personal support workers. Well, we need nurses because we are building literally tens of thousands of new long-term care beds, investments in physical hospitals, like in Brampton, 250-bed hospital in Brampton, 880 beds in Mississauga and Etobicoke for new hospitals, a new hospital in Windsor. You need, and I could go on, we need more healthcare, frontline healthcare professionals to be able to do that. And that's why so much of our investments to protect our progress against COVID-19 is not just for today, it's for tomorrow. And it's a critical part of our future. And I often say, you can't have a healthy economy without healthy people. It's not only good social policy, but it's important economic policy to make those investments. And highlighted some of these things like the senior home safety tax credit, where we're extending the tax credit to retrofit your home if you want to stay in your home longer as a senior, with guardrails or elevator up to the second floor, or not elevator, but the thing that takes you up there, is important that we can. Many people want to live in their homes longer, so let's make it easier to live in your home longer. So that's protecting our progress. Secondly is, well, not before I get there, is one of the things that is critical, and you may have heard about this, is the Canada Health Transfer. If you think back 50 years ago when Medicare was being championed, it was a 50-50 pay model. I was reading Steve Paikin recently talk about, back then, Prime Minister Robarts, as the Premier was called, Prime Minister back then. Still is in French, le Premier Ministre. You know, he said, well, it's a Machiavellian scheme, the Canada Health Transfer. And, you know, the reason for why he said that was because it was a 50-50 split between federal and provincial, and he didn't believe it would be sustainable, that the provinces would end up footing most of the bill. Well, today, Ontario foots 78% of the bill, and the federal government foots 22%. And this is an environment where we have an aging population when your healthcare costs are back-end loaded. They're typically, the majority of your healthcare costs are at the end of your life, not at the beginning or the middle. So we need to have a partner in Ottawa to help us with the impending healthcare costs. that are certainly going to put a stress on our fiscal situation. Now, I'm not waiting for the federal government. We're making these investments today, but I got to tell you, the bills are adding up. So we're going to keep the pressure on the federal government. And if we don't do something, that gap will increase to 18%, and feds will kick in and we'll be funding 82%. On to the second part of our plan and our vision to solve our long-term economic challenge. That is building Ontario. You probably heard us talk about building highways and building roads as part of the fall economic statement. And let me tell you, we are spending over $20 billion over the next 10 years to build highways. The population growth in the GTA is about 1 million every 5 years in the greater Golden Horseshoe. Some of them are going to buy cars. That's undeniable. And we are building public transit for those where we can in congregate areas like Toronto. We're investing almost $30 billion in public transit in Toronto. We're spending another $40 billion on public transit through the GO system. So we're spending almost $70 billion, over $60 billion on public transit. But we got to invest in highways too. And people, as they go into the northern parts of the 905 and the trucks that are taking goods to market, will have to invest in infrastructure. And that's why it's so important that we make those investments in our infrastructure. And let me tell you one thing why I'm so bullish on infrastructure. We go back to productivity. Since Confederation, the almost $400 billion we've put on the taxpayers, $400 billion of debt, 2/3 of that was to finance deficits. 1/3 was to build real assets. And I just believe building real assets, these are long-lived assets, be it highways, be it waterworks, be it public transit, be it infrastructure like broadband, and I can talk about that, how much we're investing in broadband. These are long-lived assets. These are real assets, and we're funding them at low rates. And we just did a 10-year bond deal last week for, I think, 2 3/4, or 2 1/4, something like that. We're able to get, in this environment, still very, very low-cost debt. Now, interest rates will go up, but we're making these investments today and borrowing the money so that we can have a more productive society down the road, because these are productive assets. This is like buying a house versus taking a trip down to Disney every year. And then finally, what we're doing as part of our plan is working for workers. As I mentioned before, it's so critical that we invest in labor. We got to invest in productivity, but we have to invest in our labor force. We have to invest in the jobs of tomorrow. And a lot of the jobs of tomorrow, as I mentioned earlier, are in the skilled trades, for example. We're building things. To build a highway or broadband or a hospital or long-term care facility, we need people who can actually build those things. We need the engineers. We need the trades. We need a range of people to do that. And we're doing it in an environment where growth rates in population are decelerating because of lower fertility rates and the aging population that we have. We have to attract more workers right across the world. I'm the son of 2 immigrants. We have to attract and continue to attract people from right across the world to come to Ontario. The best place to raise a family, in my view, the best place to live in one of the greatest country in the world. But we need to bring them here, and we need to train them, and we need to skill them up. And that's why we're investing literally hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, whether it's retraining on skilled trades, putting in programs for second careers, being more inclusive with women and racialized communities, and all walks of life in Ontario. There's going to be a good job, but we have to invest in those jobs. We can't just stand by and watch those other jurisdictions attract talent. We need to bring that talent and train it here in Ontario. So that is partly why you see us standing up there with Jerry Dias and Smokey Thomas and other labor leaders, because we're doing this together. We're really on the same team when we talk about building a future for workers. So in a nutshell, that is our plan. We're going to say no to the old style of doing politics, saying no and talking about building a subway to Scarborough when the first discussion was 50 years ago to build a subway to Scarborough. We're going to say yes to building things. We're going to say yes to workers, and we're going to say yes to protecting our hard-fought progress against COVID-19 and making sure that we're never vulnerable again. So with that, Bill, I think I went slightly over your 1-minute paddle. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.